All right, Zam, on today's show, we have Cassie Campbell-Pascall. Really lucky to have her because in my mind, she is one of the coolest Canadians ever. Sports fans will know who she is, but if you're not a sports fan, you're in for a treat.
Yeah, and she led Canada to 2 gold medals and 1 silver medal, and is a leader among Canadian hockey players in this country.
Yeah, definitely somebody that anybody can be inspired by, so I'm really looking forward to chatting with her. Hey, welcome back to Unanchored. Shahid Devji here, alongside Zam Kareem, and we're back for a very special episode, one that I've been looking forward to for a few weeks now, since we spoke to Cassie Campbell-Pascall, who is a Canadian legend, as we've mentioned in the intro there, not only for her hockey, but for everything she's done and continues to do. But Zam, before we talk to Cassie, let's talk to each other. How are you doing these days?
Actually, you know what? I've been doing better.
Yeah.
Back in the Lower Mainland, like I'm back at I'm not living at my parents' house, but I use the house as essentially my de facto office now.
Nice.
So still not working, but like when you need a nice place, quiet place to work, I finally have a space that I feel comfortable in. And you know what it's like. I know you haven't gone to the office in a while, but you know what it's like to like get in your car and to drive from a place where you sleep to a place where you then go to work, or like you set your mind up. I really like it. I really like that, going to a different place to get things done. And it really feels good to have a separate space other than where I've been sleeping to actually get my work done. So that I'd say that it's really nice to have that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and I are different in the sense that I'm a homebody. You know, you like getting out, you like doing things and seeing people, and I like to be at home as much as I do like getting out. But and that's partially because of my home office. Like I feel really comfortable in my home office. I have been working from home for a while now during this whole COVID-19 thing, but I've had this home office for a few years now. But it wasn't until this quarantine hit that I really set it up to my liking, and I look forward to being in here. I look forward to my walk across the hall to coming to this office every morning. Got my electric guitar here. The amp is right under the desk, and you know the mic's here, and everything's just kind of the guitar's behind me and everything. Just everything's set up, and I like being in here. So it makes me feel comfortable in my own space. But I do understand what you're talking about. You know, it's routine is good, and getting yourself psyched to do something with that drive is fun. I always enjoyed my commute to work when I was taking the SkyTrain because I got to read or I got to listen to podcasts or music. That kind of was me time during the day, and let me kind of consume and engage in my own hobbies, and I'm certainly missing that these days for sure. But that's why I have the electric guitar right next to me.
Oh, for sure. And you know, we're right about to head into the holidays, and we're recording this just before Canada Day. So you're going to be hearing this after Canada Day. Happy Canada Day. Happy anti-Canada Day.
Hey, this is a good Canada Day episode, hey, with Cassie Campbell.
Yeah, talking to a Canadian legend, a member of the Order of Canada. This is going to be really, really exciting. But yeah, it's you know, the weather this summer has sucked. So, and trying to get out and be outside.
And we're planning to golf tomorrow morning, and it looks like rain. I don't like a rainy Canada Day. That's not my style. Like Canada Day for me is sunny, it's hot, it's outdoors, it's good Canadian music. I remember buying a Sam Roberts Band CD on Canada Day, and that began a tradition of me just buying Canadian music on Canada Day, which stopped with Spotify and Apple Music, but at least support Canadian music by going. Like Surrey holds, where I live, holds a festival every year. They bring in some big Canadian acts, and they're still holding it this year virtually. But I always like getting out to those celebrations and hearing Canadian artists and just really being proud to be Canadian because I am.
Oh, for sure. And you know, it's a great time to celebrate our common Canadianness and our common, identity as Canadians, and also an opportunity to reflect on things Canada does also need to do to be better for all people. And I think,
I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think this year there's a really big spotlight on not only the things that we share in common, but the things that we then need to do to make the our society more equal and a better place for more people. This year, I'm glad that Canada Day is going to be able to make some space for that. Yes, and this is a very different way that we're going to be commemorating and celebrating Canada Day without any physical Canada Day celebrations. Lots of at home celebrations, but hopefully golf in the morning if the rain holds off as much as it can. And but it's always a time to. It's really the official kickoff to summer.
Okay. Well, with that, why don't we talk about our guest here, Cassie Campbell-Pascall, and like we were saying, a Canadian legend, and rightfully so. So today on the show, as we mentioned, Cassie Campbell-Pascall, who is a commentator on Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada for NHL broadcasts, and specifically the Calgary Flames. But she is a hockey player, and she was a hockey player, and maybe is best known in Canadian hockey circles as a member of the Canadian Olympic team. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with her, because when I grew up, she was one of the people that I looked up to as doing the coolest things ever, and that's wearing the maple leaf and playing for Team Canada.
Well, not only just wearing the maple leaf, but she also wore the C on those Canadian women's hockey teams, and leading those teams to 2 golds in 2002 and in 2006. We all remember the one in 2002 in Salt Lake City when Canada won the double golds. We get into that in our conversation with her, as well as winning in 2006 in Torino, Italy. But a lot of people may not remember, or maybe that this is their first recollection of women's hockey in Canada, is 1998 in the Olympics in Nagano, Japan, where Canada won silver and lost to the United States in the gold medal game. That was a huge tournament for a lot of hockey fans, especially female hockey fans that got to see some of their idols and play on the national stage for the first time. And for young boys like us at the time, 12, 13 years old, 11, 12, 13 years old, getting a chance to see NHLers in the Olympics for the first time, but also getting a chance to see women strap it up and play at the highest level for the first time in our history. And we've had some classic Canada-U.S. women's hockey games, and nobody will forget the one in, was it 2014, which was I know Cassie Campbell wasn't on that team, but the Canadian gold medal win where they won in overtime. But I'm just reminded of that. But yes, we're excited to talk with Cassie, and we had a really great conversation with her, and got to learn a lot about her, including a relationship to Lucy Maud Montgomery. Who is she, and why is she important in Canadian history?
I think you're going to tell us, aren't you? Or are you
Yes,
going to
I
wait for the
will.
conversation?
Well, so Lucy Maud Montgomery is the writer of Anna Green Gables, and if we,
I have that book.
yes,
I,
yeah, it's
I
a
don't think I've read it, though.
great Canadian story from Prince Edward Island, and that's where Cassidy comes from, and her family still is in. They still have the museum in the house where Lucy Maud Montgomery grew up, and that home is now the Anna Green Gables Museum, which her family still runs, which is, I think, is really cool, and a connection that maybe not a lot of other of our guests would be able to make, going so far back and into the annals of Canadian history.
Yeah, we were talking about her being kind of one of the coolest Canadians out there, but to have that tie to Canadian history is pretty cool too. I mean, for me, the big thing that stands out for in my memory with Cassie Campbell-Pascall is definitely 1998 when women were first at the Olympic Games, but then for sure in 2002 when I mean I can remember where I was when I was watching both Canadian teams win gold at the Olympics, and for the first time in 50 years for the men, and first time ever for the women. So it was really cool, and she got to be a part of that history and lead the way for sure, and a trailblazer in many ways, in sport and in in life, and so that there are some really interesting life experiences that she's gone through that she gets to share with us today, and kind of share some advice for other women and all our listeners about kind of how to navigate those life experiences. So really looking forward to that conversation. Okay, so with that, why don't we get into the chat with Cassie Campbell-Pascall? When it comes to Canadians, Cassie Campbell-Pascall is as Canadian as they get. Like Gretzky, Lemieux, Crosby, the name Campbell is synonymous with hockey in this country. And as many of us know, hockey has a way of capturing our hearts and minds. She was a part of the Canadian women's hockey team that played in the Olympics for the first time in 1998, and in 2002, her and her teammates, along with the Canadian men's team, won double gold at the Olympic Winter Games in Salt Lake City, Utah. Her long and successful career on the ice earned her induction into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame in 2007, and in 2016, she was named a member of the Order of Canada, which is the highest civilian honor in the country. Despite hanging up her skates, Campbell-Pascall is not too far removed from the ice. She's a color commentator for Sportsnet's NHL broadcasts, and her husband Brad is an assistant general manager with the NHL's Calgary Flames. Cassie joins us on Unanchored to talk not only about hockey, but her journey in sport, leadership, and dealing with adversity. Cassie, we really appreciate you taking the time for us and our listeners. First off, how are you? We're living in interesting times during this COVID-19 pandemic, with hockey at a standstill. How's it going at home?
Well, I think initially for me, I think it's obviously disappointing. Obviously, you're nervous. You're all those things when something like this happens. And I kind of went off the grid, and I just stayed at home with my family, and enjoyed my daughter who's in grade 4, and I'm homeschooling her, and working out a bit, and but kind of stayed away from the news and stayed away from social media, and just really kind of went into a Zen moment for myself and my family. And now over the last week or so, just kind of getting back into the swing of things. And my husband works for the Flames, and of course I'd be in the thick of things with the NHL playoffs, so we're missing NHL hockey right now. And but we're just really hoping everyone stays safe, and we're trying to keep a positive mindset here, that this is much needed time off for us with no travel, and much needed time for us to be with our daughter, and enjoying getting some home projects done as well.
Well, I can imagine living in a hockey family. Both of you travel a lot, and this type of time, like you said, is probably rare. So I'm glad to hear you're enjoying it. And as I was saying before we started recording here, it's really nice to talk to you, because Zamir and I are big hockey fans, and we've watched every Olympic hockey tournament since the 1998 games in Nagano, Japan, which of course was the first time that women's hockey was included in the Olympics. And we're big NHL fans as well. So, well, what I wanted to start off with is sort of what you remember about that time, 1998, when I guess women's hockey came to the world stage like at any other point in its history.
Well, it was incredible. I remember being, 16, 17 years old when it was announced in about 92 that the Olympics were going to be in 98. And that obviously became my goal as a young hockey player. And I actually almost quit hockey my second year of university to play basketball. And that ended up being the first year I made the world championship team. So, a lot of things fell into place for me personally, but I remember that first Olympics and just how green we all were. And, I was a young leader on that team, but, even our veteran leaders were, first time Olympians. So it was a really new experience for all of us. And I can tell you that it was huge. In Canada, it was really exciting that women's hockey was going to be in the Olympics. And we had a ton of coverage, and, people were at our practices every day and kind of following our every move. And that was really new to all of us. And I can tell you, losing that gold medal game, it's something that still kind of haunts me today, because it was really the only opportunity for some of our true pioneers to get an opportunity to win gold. And I still think about those players standing on the blue line with the silver medal, and it kind of motivates me to continue to help grow the game. And but I learned a lot about myself personally, and I think I became a better leader and a better player, in 4 years' time after that.
Well, Cassie, thanks again for joining us. And not only did we watch you play, but we've been following your career as a broadcaster. Prior to the Olympics, what was life like as a women's hockey player in Canada, and how did it change after the '98 games in Nagano?
Well, I think it really changed around the world after 98. I think, when your sport makes it to the Olympic Games, I mean, that changes the way that your International Olympic Federation thinks about you and the importance of your sport. And as much as it stung to have the US win, I think it did great things for the sport, south of the border. And more and more girls were starting to play. It was just, they could see their role models, and they could see that it was something that they can inspire or aspire to be like, go play for Team Canada and go to the Olympics. And so I think that became not only just little boys' dreams to play in the NHL, but little girls finally, as hockey players, had a dream to look forward to. And it was important for grassroots hockey. And, you just saw the numbers kind of, double after that and continue to grow, after each Olympic cycle.
You mentioned that you almost quit hockey prior to the Olympics being announced there, and in your university years. Was it always a goal for you to go as far with hockey as possible, even though you were thinking about quitting, or were you just an athlete, saying playing basketball, and you wanted to play sports, but you had other goals in mind? What were your goals as a 16 or 17-year-old?
Well, I think in our family, it was about, going to post-secondary education and getting an education and eventually getting a good job. That was sort of it. And I played competitive soccer, and I'm not sure I ever would have made our Canadian team, but I made it out of Ontario pretty high, and always sort of tried to balance soccer and hockey. And then my second year university, just I didn't have an enjoyable first season at university playing hockey, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go play basketball. So I went and trained all summer to play basketball that next year at the University of Guelph, and Angela Orton was the basketball coach at the time. And luckily, Sue Shear, who was the first ever captain of the Worlds in 1990 for Team Canada, ended up becoming our coach, and she kind of really saved my career. And so I ended up continuing to play hockey, and she said, I'm going to help you get on the national team. And I, she was a big supporter, and pushed me, and we did drills in practice specifically that I would see at Team Canada camp. And she just really supported me. So, I was, I think, a surprise after being cut twice in 1992 as a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. I think I was a bit of a surprise to make that 94 team, and as a 20-year-old, and my career just kind of took off after that.
And it's safe to say you're not the only trailblazing athlete in your family. Your mother, Eunice, played in a professional women's football league in Toronto for the Canadian Bells. Is that where your passion for sports came from your familial connection?
Yeah, well, I think, my mom always played sports. She was big into equestrian horseback riding. She played softball, and as a little girl, I would tag along with her. Right? I mean, she had to bring us along, and so I think for me, seeing her play sports, it was kind of like, oh, well, girls can play sports too. And I had an older brother, and I kind of wanted to be just like him. And he always made sure I wasn't the last one picked in street hockey and road hockey, and any other sports teams that we played with. And so I think having both parents, my dad was a really good athlete as well. And I think, but watching my mom, be active and be involved in sports, and I think that was sort of something where I thought, okay, it's pretty normal. And even though it really wasn't normal, I mean, I'm at the age where, as a little girl, it wasn't normal to play sports, and especially hockey. So, that I'm glad to see that that's changed, and I'm glad to see that the young girls nowadays are getting an opportunity to see their role models a lot more than when I would
Sounds like your brother was a better big brother than I was to my little brother. I'm sure he has some things to say about me and when we played hockey on the street. But you mentioned it a little bit there about the Olympics changing your perception and perspective a little bit, and then also you talked about having people to look up to as young athletes. It's really helpful to have someone to put up on your wall on a poster to look at that person that you're trying to be a model of sorts, right? For me, as a hockey player, at least, it was initially Pavel Bure, then Marcus Naslund. There was no dearth of people to look at. And when I focused my move into broadcasting, I looked at Jim Houston and John Shorthouse as play-by-play guys to follow, and so on and so forth as my career has progressed. Once that perception and the perspective changed for you, who was it that you looked up to in hockey or sports to try and make a career or a life out of it?
Well, it's funny, as a little girl, I looked up to Paul Coffey. I wore number 7 and 77 because of him. And that's who I got to see every Saturday night, right, on Hockey Night in Canada. And then when I moved on, eventually I got an opportunity to meet, our true pioneers like Shirley Cameron and Angela James and France St. Louis. And so those people became kind of my mentors and people that I looked up to. And they're, you know, Angela James, the Hockey Hall of Famer, and now these women are starting to get the recognition that they deserve. But I knew exactly who they were at a crucial time in my life when I needed female role models to look up to. And I easily could have stopped playing sports at 16, 17, because as a female, you really couldn't go anywhere. So, kind of what was the point other than just having fun? And then, as I evolved into broadcasting, I look at, Brenda Irving and Colleen Jones and people like that I used to see covering sports. And but for me, at the same time, there weren't really females that covered NHL hockey and covered it from an analyst point of view. And that was something, even as a host, the stories I told were more, from a hockey standpoint, if you will, from an on ice standpoint, if you will. And so I kind of had to reinvent the wheel there, especially doing color and being the first female to do it. You didn't really have someone that you could look to, but I was accepted by my male colleagues, and I'm thankful for that. And all the players, they grew up watching women's hockey, so they kind of knew who I was when I first came in, and they treated me like a player, which is kind of the ultimate respect that you can get. And even today, especially these young kids, they grew up from day one watching women's hockey, and they just think it's completely normal. And so they're often asking me about the female game and about all the stars and what's happening. And so I had different role models throughout my career, and Kelly Rudy, Ron McLean were two people that really took me under their wing. And from your neck of the woods, my father-in-law is Bernie Pascal. So, I used to get an email after every game from him, the good, the bad, the ugly. And that was one of the ways I learned about broadcasting too. And he was, it came from a good place, and I knew he was being honest and in a loving way. So I was very fortunate to kind of have that in my back pocket as well.
Well, that's great.
So
Were you always were you always looking forward to those emails, or did you fear them a little bit sometimes? Because I know we can be our own worst critics, right?
I think for me, just with an athlete perspective, we don't want things to be sugar coated. Just tell us how it is. Tell us what we need to improve on. I don't have an hour to sit and talk with the coach. Just give it to me straight. Give it to me in 2 minutes, and we want to move on and do other things. So I think having that background allowed me to kind of take the criticism, which I faced quite a lot early on and still do today. It allows me to take it in stride. It allows me to take it in perspective. And I think coming from your father-in-law, it's coming from a truthful, honest place, and he's trying to help you learn. And so it was important for me to see those emails. And some days I waited till the next day, but most times I watched and looked at them, right after the game.
So you've been talking about role models, and one thing we've been long talking about is about how women athletes need more women athlete role models at the highest level. And it's been a debate in hockey for a long time too. Of course, we've seen some big strides, and we've talked about the 98 games being a big part of that. And in more recent years, 2 professional women's leagues and women participating in the NHL All-Star game. There's been a lot that's happened. But during that time, was it and is it still a part of your goal to be a role model for other girls and women?
Well, I think so. I mean, I don't kind of look at it that way, but I think it is important. If you get an opportunity to speak to a young girl or a girls team, or help out wherever you can. And my daughter's playing hockey now; she's 9, and her teammates kind of at the start of the season have no idea who I am, other than the fact I'm my daughter's mom. And then of course their parents tell them, and then they're like, "Oh, okay," and then they kind of see it, and then they're kind of picking my brain. And but I think the current group of national team players just do an outstanding job of being the face. And I'm back with Hockey Canada part-time, working with our national women's team for the last year, and that's been really fun. And getting an opportunity to get to know them, and how they're kind of carrying on the traditions of our program and doing a great job of being ambassadors. And but I understand my role, and now it's become a little bit more guys behind the scenes, and pushing things from behind the scenes, like a WNHL, which is my focus, so that we can finally have a true professional women's hockey league, which we've never had before. So that's kind of all always been my focus, and I'll continue to push until one day hopefully it happens.
Right, so we'll talk about that professional women's hockey league in a bit here, but I want to get back to hockey on the ice and the Olympics, and specifically we've been talking about '98 a lot, and Canada lost in the final to the United States in '98, as you know. I don't need to remind you of that, but I can't even imagine of dealing with that loss. I've had recreational hockey tournaments where the Vancouver team lost to Calgary, and it still stings, even though we've beat them in tournaments since then. How did you deal with that loss specifically, and how do you, throughout your career, both in hockey and in broadcasting, deal with loss generally?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I'll be honest with you, I think the first 3 months after that, you point fingers, right? Well, it's not my fault. And I think a lot of us looked at our coach, a lot of us looked at Hockey Canada, and we felt we deserved a little bit more support. And yet the reality was that we all needed to look at ourselves. And I didn't play very well at that Olympics. And I was, coming into those Olympic Games as a defenseman all-star the year before. And I was an assistant captain and was provided to play, supposed to play a big role. And so I think you look back after this thing and, pointing fingers, and you kind of point the finger at yourself and you look at yourself in the mirror, and that's kind of the only way you get better. And you kind of self-analyze, and where do I need to go and what do I need to do to be better? And so that's kind of what I did. And I went through that the next 4-year cycle to make sure that we changed the color of the medal in 2002. And we did. And that's kind of the way I approach all challenges. Like I believe, an athlete's mindset is we kind of want challenges, to be honest, because we think that's where we learn the most about ourselves. And so I kind of embrace challenge in my life. I want life, and I don't strive for perfection, which, I just strive for consistency. And I think, having that mindset definitely helps get over some tough times in life. And, some are more tougher than sport, of course. A lot of us have personal things or things that go on in our lives behind the scenes. But to me, challenges give us perspective. They give us motivation, and they're things that I think people should want in their life, because overall, I truly believe they make us better. And that's kind of what '98 did to our program and for me personally.
Of course, you and your teammates had played in world championships, which previous to the Olympics were the highest stage for women's hockey, and you had played in high stakes games your entire life. I mean, for many elite athletes, every game means as much as the next. But I would have to think that playing in the Olympics in '98 and beyond that came with a lot of pressure, knowing that the world's eyes and Canada's focus was on women's hockey, and outside of those times, unfortunately, it's not. How do you deal with that type of pressure, or when you're on the ice, do you even feel it?
Well, I think once you're on the ice, you just play. I mean, that's why you train, and that's why you train and play as much as you do, because when those big moments come, they just kind of seem like regular moments, right? And not to say that you don't get nervous and all those types of things, because of course you do. But for me, I think my any struggle or pressure that I faced was more so off the ice, and the expectations that were kind of put on me, off the ice from Hockey Canada, from sponsors, from sort of being the face of the game, if you will, and the extra requests that often came my way. And that was something initially was new to me, and it was new to women's hockey. And so you kind of didn't have anyone to lean on and how to deal with it. And it was something that I kind of grew up trying to figure out and deal with. And I realized that my first priority was, just to play the game and to train and to be the best I could be for my teammates and to lead my teammates and to push them to win. And, we were lucky. We had such a great group, and we all kind of took care of each other. And a lot of the names are sort of 1, 2, 3 names from that generation, but it was a room full of greatness. It really was. And so it kind of made my job easy. But I think the pressure for me just came off the ice and all the demands that I had behind the scenes. And once I kind of figured out how to deal with that and keep that pressure away, I think I became a better athlete and a better leader as well.
Well, I'm glad you had the experience doing all those interviews, because we're lucky enough to talk to you now. You've been doing it for years now, so hopefully it doesn't feel like pressure with us. I think the pressure's on us in this conversation.
Well, it's all good. It's all good.
And in 2002, the Olympic Games were special for Canadian hockey fans. The men, after a devastating loss in '98, won gold for the first time in 50 years, beating the U.S. on their home soil. And of course, your team, the women's team, did the same. It was double gold for Canada, beating the Americans in both instances. Just how heated is that rivalry between Canada and the U.S. in hockey?
Well, it's huge, and I think it's been a big reason. You look at the Finland-Sweden rivalry in Europe and Canada-U.S. here in North America, and we just continue to push each other and continue to take the women's game, to another level. And back in my generation, we didn't know each other. We often didn't play on the same NCAA teams or the same teams, and so we really didn't know each other. And we really didn't care about each other, and quite frankly, I don't think we really respected each other than the fact we both understood that both teams were growing the game. And so nowadays they know each other a little bit more, but I still think the rivalry is as heated as ever. And for the most part, over the years, it's come down to those final two teams, with the exception, about 4 or 5 occasions. And um, so when you're training, you got to be, you're thinking the U.S. a lot of the time. And so the rivalry is intense, it's fierce. And I know I've become friends now with some of the teams, U.S. members that I used to play against that I didn't like and never wanted to get to know. And now I've gotten to know them, and they're great friends and they're great people, and they
Mhm.
care about the game, and they're just like you. Um, so that's been really fun for me to kind of get to know some of them, and hang out with some of them, and have an impact on the game like they do. And but it's pretty intense, it's pretty fierce. And it's definitely something that it's hard to shake their hand after a loss. It's when they beat you, it's just really not a fun time.
And I recently watched an interview with Ron McLean, Wayne Gretzky, and Haley Wickenheiser, and Wayne shared a story which shows the hate or maybe dislike that runs so deep between the two sides, that the American women and Haley and the Canadian women didn't want to share a locker room at a Wayne Gretzky fantasy camp. Has that rivalry ever gotten old, or it now you guys have this camaraderie friendship that you've developed over the years?
Well, recently at the NHL All-Star, when the women were there, they actually did share a room, and I can tell you at the end of the All-Star game, Canada won 2-1. And it's not fun to go back in that room as an American when you've lost. Now, when you win, it's a little bit easier, but I think it's still there, and it's still awkward. And they're competitive, and so yeah, it's still there for sure. I think there's a bit more professionalism off the ice as far as working together. And the PWHPA has a lot of American players and European players and Canadian players that are all now fighting, for a true professional women's hockey league. And so I think that's brought them a little bit closer. But on the ice, it's just as fierce as ever. And the competition now is, it's way better than my generation. I mean, there's no one that I played with that's even close to as good as these players today. And so that's just taking the game to another level itself.
So, Cassie, I think it would be impossible and even maybe irresponsible of us to talk to you without talking about the topic of leadership. Obviously, you were the captain of 2 Olympic gold medal teams, and certainly a leader on the team beyond just those times. Had that always been the case for you in sports? Did you always gravitate to a leadership role, and or did you have to work at it?
Well, I think I was fortunate enough to, when I was growing up, I was kind of a captain or an assistant. And I played with, especially in my younger years, I played with a lot of older players, just because we didn't have the numbers that they do now. And I got a chance to learn from older athletes all the time. And I think that helped me with my leadership. And, by all means, I was fortunate enough to be a captain with Team Canada, of a room full of captains and assistants. I mean, it was a pretty easy group to lead. But I think as a leader, if you stop learning, then you're not a leader. I think you're always looking to develop and learn and change, and finding ways to get better. And you rely on other people around you. I think sometimes, people who think they're leading and aren't leaders, they don't include everyone around them. They don't include the strengths of the people around them. And I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the big things about leadership, is making sure that the people who are experts at the things that they're experts at are included in those things. And it can't just be about one person, or whether it's the captain or a CEO. I mean, it has to be a collective group, and everyone has to feel important. And that's always a big thing for me. Like, I always tried to get to know my teammates, and get to know people around me, what makes them tick and what makes them, thrive and perform. And but by no means are you ever perfect. And just because you're captain of Team Canada doesn't mean you're a perfect leader. And for me, it was just about working hard and being consistent and being honest and being humble. And hopefully my leadership fell into place. But it was definitely a really easy group to lead. And now I'm always reading leadership books, and and talking to different leaders, and doing what I can to continue to learn to be better in that department for sure.
You obviously were a pretty feisty player on the ice, and it seems like you, like many hockey leaders, wanted to lead by example on the ice, humbly, as you were saying. Do you have any instances or examples of when you had to kind of put your foot down and kind of go rah in the dressing room? Like, is that an effective way of leadership, or was it for you as well, or does it always kind of come down to leading by example?
Well, I think you always have to lead by example for sure, whether it's on the ice, off the ice, in the gym, just working hard. And I wasn't always the best player, especially you get to Team Canada, of course, there were better players than me, but I knew I brought everything I could to help the team win. And I was versatile and played defense, played forward, played first line, third line, whatever the coach kind of wanted me to do, and didn't complain about it and understood my role. And so I think that helped me, the fact that I could deal with adversity, and deal with playing a different role. And I think that was important. And, sure, there was one time I had to call out a teammate, which was sort of my last resort in front of the group. And, I tried everything else up until that point, and had other people try and reach out. And, I know to this day, because she's still a friend of mine, that, she ended up playing some of the best hockey of her career after that. And, so sometimes you got to be hard, and sometimes you got to do hard things, and it's not always easy. But in the room, I was vocal for sure, but also tried to let other people be vocal. And I remember a story in 2002. Dana Antel, who was probably our quietest player, stepped up in the room and just said the right things at the right time. And I was the one that told the story in the dressing room about our flag and it being in the American dressing room. And, never in my wildest dreams thought that it would ever leave the dressing room. And of course it did. But it was something that I thought we needed to be mad, going into that third period of the final game, and against the U.S. And I thought my teammates needed to know that they had a flag in their room, and were potentially walking on it as they went out. And I think sometimes you got to be vocal, and there's no question I was loud, and I was excited, and I had energy, but I also knew that it was important for other people to have a voice. And I often went to other people and said, hey, it's your time to speak now. We need you to say something. We need you to do this. And I think that's part of leadership too, is kind of deflecting from yourself and allowing other people to lead around you.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of it is temperature checking the room and relationship managing, which I'm sure you learned a lot of, and which might apply to maybe a future career of yours, which we'll get to in a bit. But I do want to talk about one more thing that's kind of hockey and Olympic related here, and obviously you played in a lot of Olympics, and as I said, Zam and I have watched a lot of Olympic hockey tournaments. And for me, while 2002 was special, and I remember exactly where I was when I was watching those gold medal games, 2010 in Vancouver was something else. Zam and I were both working the games, and fortunately enough, I got to be in Canada Hockey Place every day covering the hockey tournaments for the Olympic News Service. Certainly the highlight of my career so far, and I don't know if anything will top that sporting experience for me. So I'm wondering what the experience was like for you. You had made the transition to broadcasting. You were covering the games as a color commentator, but I've heard you speak about you wanting to go to those games and the maybe injuries kind of playing a part why you didn't. Where do you rank those games among your Olympic experiences? And did you feel any sadness during that time that you weren't on the ice?
Well, first of all, I would have been tough to make that team. After 2006, I did have a neck injury, but that would have been long healed, by the time 2010 came around. And I don't think injuries can be used as an excuse. I mean, I would have been a fourth line, maybe 13th forward at that point. And then, it was one of those things where I could maybe have hung on, maybe. But then a young player wouldn't have had the opportunity to be there and be on that stage. And it ended up being our youngest player who had the biggest impact. So let's make that clear. I was pretty tough to make that team anyways. But for me, it was funny. I had kind of a crazy 4 years because I had just gotten into broadcasting right after. And so I was so busy, those next 4 years, and I didn't have any children at the time. So I was just career focused and that type of thing. And I remember the Wednesday before I left, it was a Wednesday, I'll never forget it, before I left to actually cover the games in Vancouver. And I was packing, here at home, and And I actually had a moment where I kind of started to cry a little bit. Like I was like, holy smokes, I'm going to my first Olympics not competing, right? And I never really thought about it until like the day before I was leaving. And so it was odd, it was difficult. And then I think covering your former teammates when you kind of have to be an unbiased broadcaster, and I know you're working for a Canadian broadcasting company, but still, you have to be sort of, you got to talk more about the US and Finland and the other countries. And so it was a unique experience for me. It was very emotional, but at the end of it, and my husband worked with our men's team, to come home as a family, sort of thing, with the women's team winning and the men's team winning again. It was really special. And I was so proud of my teammates. And I went to the Canada House party after and celebrated with them, and knew how much pressure they were under to win, on home soil, and all the things that they had gone through that year. And so it was a really proud moment for me. And I was excited to be able to be there as a broadcaster, and to cover the sport and to give it the recognition that it deserved. And it was just really fun. It was really fun in those last moments to watch my former teammates win. And it actually got a little bit emotional on the broadcast, which I'm probably not supposed to allowed to do, but I'm human and I'm Canadian, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think we all had a pass on that one, and if I'm not mistaken, you got to run in the torch relay that year too, which is a really unique experience.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a funny story about that. I was covering a Hockey Night in Canada game the night before in Montreal, and I flew the Sunday morning early to Charlottetown to get to the Anna Green Gables Museum. And they actually had to stop the torch run to allow my car to get by, the parade, if you will. And so the police had to pull over the torch relay and let my car go through. And I literally had like 5 minutes to change into the outfit that they had for us, and go out and get the torch from the next person. And to be in PEI, which is where my family's from, and where I grew up in the summer times, going to visit my grandmother and my aunts and uncles and cousins. And that was really kind of a neat experience for sure.
Yeah, and to tell you how much of a fan I am and we are, I remember chasing Wayne Gretzky in his Ford pickup truck as he had the had the torch in downtown Vancouver. So we all had experiences with the torch in 2010.
And you were running the torch relay at the Anna Green Gables house that Lucy Maud Montgomery is you're a descendant of, so which is also probably really cool too.
Yeah, my father actually grew up in the house in Park Corner, Prince Edward Island. It's the Anna Green Gables Museum, and the torch relay was in Cavendish at the Anna Green Gables property there. But I'm my great great grandfather married her mother's sister, so I am actually a descendant. And my father grew up in the house where she was married, and
Oh.
because my father's family was poor, they kept all the furniture and everything. And so it's still a museum today, and my uncle George and my aunt Maureen and my aunt Pam run it. And yeah, it's a big thing in our house. And actually, I have my daughter here as I'm homeschooling her, reading Anna Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea. And so my late grandmother will be very proud that I'm doing that and carrying on and passing on the tradition.
Wow, that's really cool. We'll stay with history, and I'm a sucker for history and specific dates on the calendar. And I remember this date specifically, a Saturday night, October 14th, 2006. I turn on Hockey Night in Canada, and I hear one familiar voice and one that I'm not too familiar with at that point. Harry Neal gets stuck in the snow at his Buffalo home, unable to make it to Toronto for a Saturday night Hockey Night in Canada game, and they needed someone to fill in. What do you remember, and what was that experience like?
Well, it was 14 years ago, I think now, and but I remember every single moment. I remember my very first game the weekend before was the Battle of Alberta, and I knew hockey and I knew all the people, but I never went to school for broadcasting, and so I think that was very obvious early on. And then my second day on the job, it was Calgary at Toronto, and there I am as a sideline reporter, and I show up Saturday morning and talk to the players and the coaches, and get ready for the broadcast. And my producer Shirali Najak, who you guys should have on this podcast, actually, he's just a genius. But
Mm-hmm.
he took me to the side and said, hey, we have a bit of an issue tonight, and explained to me that Harry Neal had to be home. And At first I thought they were playing a rookie joke on me. I thought this was it. This is my rookie initiation on Hockey Night in Canada. And it was true. They wanted me to do color and fill in for Harry Neal and sit alongside Bob Cole. And I remember the first couple minutes sort of thinking, okay, I potentially not only can embarrass myself as a person, but I could potentially be embarrassing my sport, right? If I make a mistake on Hockey Night in Canada, it's a big platform, and oh, see, women's hockey, they don't know anything about hockey. And so I hesitated for about 2 minutes, and I quickly called my husband, and who was my boyfriend at the time. And actually, no, we were married at the time. He was my husband. And I just said, should I do this? And he said yes right away. And that was all I needed, to know that one person in this world was going to love me after I embarrassed myself in front of 6 million people. But the whole team took me under their wing. Bob Cole took me under his wing, and it ended up being a great experience. And I called my brother and I called my teammate Vicky Sanahara just to tell them what was going on that day. And it was a whirlwind of an experience. And I took a lot of criticism, of course, because Harry Neal and Bob Cole were the tandem that we'd heard for 30 plus years. And then all of a sudden, the new voice, it's a woman, which was even more change for people. But I know that it was a great stepping stone for my career, and I'm glad that I took the opportunity. And since then, I pretty much done color throughout the years, every single year, and now this is my third season of doing color full time. So it was a great opportunity for me, and I'm glad that it led to more opportunities.
Can you talk a little bit more about that criticism? Specifically, but also in general, how have you handled criticism over your career, whether it be in hockey or getting into the broadcast game, which was obviously kind of a male dominated industry for a long time, and still is to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think, when you cover hockey in this country, you have to understand that people are passionate about it and they love their teams, right? And if you don't say the right thing about their team or a positive thing about their team based on what you see, they think you're cheering for the other team. And of course, that's just not the case. I mean, you're watching a game and you're analyzing it based on what you see. And but I think being a woman, it was just a new voice. It was a higher pitched voice. It was different. And the biggest criticism I think I got initially was I never played in the NHL. So how do you know anything about hockey? And my answer to that was, well, Elliot Friedman, one of the best in the business, Bob McKenzie, one of the best in the business, Ron McLean, they never played in the NHL, yet their voices seem to be okay, and once I kind of said that to people, people were like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And I think people were naive about the women's game. They didn't understand that even though we weren't paid professionally, we took it as a professional sport and we trained just like the guys did. And we played, back in my generation, you played club and national, and you could easily play 60, 65 games a year. And so I think people didn't know enough about the women's game to understand where my knowledge or my background could come from, and what I knew about the game. And I think I just had to change the perspectives. And I still get it now. I get criticized for all kinds of things, and I don't mind the criticism based on what I say and based on your opinion. Where I have an issue is some of the things I have to deal with just because I am a woman. And to me, a lot of it is offside. A lot of it, if I made it public, I think those people could be in a lot of trouble. And but I also learned that if you don't want to be criticized, then say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing. And so criticism comes with being successful, and criticism comes with being in the public eye, and criticism comes when you want to be better at something. And if you can't take it, then you're probably in the wrong business. So I've learned to adjust to it. I've learned to learn from it, and I've learned to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. And I've learned to laugh at it. And I've also learned that something I already knew was that Canadians love hockey. And
For
so,
sure.
you when they're going to fight you on your opinions, and that's okay. That's why they watch the broadcast, and they're watching their team and they're hoping they're going to win. So it's just part of the business, I think.
For sure. And in 2016 at Ryerson University, they boasted about producing the first all-female produced hockey broadcast in U Sports. March 8th, 2020 will go down in the history of the NHL. From your first game in 2016 as a female color analyst to the first all-female on-air team in the NHL on March 8th, 2020. What was that like? And it really doesn't matter at all which gender or race calls a hockey broadcast.
That was special for me for many reasons. Obviously working with Christine Simpson and, even more so Leah Hextall, because, Christine and I had kind of done our roles over the years and it was kind of an easy thing for us. But she was really becoming that first play by play. And she knocked it out of the park. And I know how hard she worked. And, keeping in mind her full-time job is working for the province of Manitoba. So, I know she called Winnipeg Jets games behind the scenes to get ready, and she called junior games in the province of Manitoba to get ready for this moment. And she was amazing. And really, all the pressure was on her. And she's a good friend of mine, and we've covered women's hockey together, so we've worked together before. And so I was just really proud of her, and I wanted to excel that night for her. And our whole crew, from our producer to the majority of our truck, they were all women. And kudos to them too for putting on a great broadcast. And it was a group of women who, you guys know this, it's not easy to do live TV with a group you don't normally work with. And so, I thought we did a really good job, and a few little glitches here and there, but for the most part, no one would have really noticed. And I had a really fun night that night, and it was a big game, the Flames in Vegas, and it mattered. And, at that time it was close standings and in the Pacific Division. So, kudos to Sportsnet for doing that, and for giving us a big game. It was a national Rogers hometown hockey game. It just wasn't a, Flames regional or whatever. And so, that was a big step for them, and hopefully Leah gets more opportunities down the road.
And will we be seeing more of those all-female broadcast teams again soon, hopefully?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think once people see it once, they're like, okay, and they'll get used to it. And we're seeing college football, which has huge audiences down in the U.S. We're seeing more and more female play-by-play. And I just think as long as they're knowledgeable and they know the sport, then I think it's going to be just a matter of time. But at the same time, I also think the best people need to be in those positions. I think that's the way I've always felt. Even on the national team, everyone was always like, do you want a female or a male coach? And I just want the best person in that position. And if you're a woman, you got to still work hard. If you're a man, you still got to work hard. And I still think those values need to apply.
Well, on that note, I mean, you've spoken publicly about, one day going back to your hockey roots, and that is from a perspective of having an influence on the outcome of a game. And in this case, I've heard you talk about being a general manager or maybe a coach, but a general manager of a team. And of course, your husband, as you've mentioned, is an assistant general manager with the Flames of the NHL, and a former competitor of yours. Cami Granato is a pro scout in the NHL Seattle franchise. So do you see that being a part of your future, and do you see that being in the NHL or in a women's league?
Well, I highly doubt it'll be in the NHL. I mean, it'd be a little awkward if my husband works for one team and I worked for another.
Yeah.
And where would we live and how would we make that work? So right now, it's his life in the NHL. And, there's been a few little conversations over the years of potentially having a job with NHL teams. But, for me, it was sort of more about broadcasting and being home and trying to start a family and having a family and those types of things. And, but I guess I would never say never. But right now it's his turn to be in the NHL. But I definitely love watching him do his job and learning about his job. And I know I could do it. And, the last year I went back part-time with our national women's team, and I was in an advisory role. And I got to watch Gina Kingsbury, who's the general manager of that team. And, the coach, Troy Ryan, work, and all the assistant coaches and the medical staff. And I really enjoyed sort of that big picture thinking, if you will, that a manager has to kind of go through. And so I think for me, if I was to get into a role like that, it would definitely be in women's hockey at this point, and probably with Hockey Canada. But I'm liking broadcasting right now, and eventually they're going to fire me, I'm sure, in that business. And, hopefully I have hockey to fall back on and other things to fall back on. But I definitely enjoy, learning about my husband's role and watching him work. And, we watch a lot of hockey here together, and he's asking me for my opinion on things, and I'm always asking for his opinion on things. And we don't talk a lot about hockey, but when we do, we just try to pick each other's brains, and it's kind of fun that way.
Yeah, pretty good crash course, I would say, the conversations you might be having. Back to Cami specifically, why do you think it's still, or is it still difficult for women to crack into the NHL in positions of power? Because when it comes to experience in hockey, many of you, like yourself and Cami, it's second to none, right? The experience you guys have had is just, just as much as any other guys. So do you think there's a reason, or is it still difficult?
Well, I think the NHL has been a little slow, including women. I think they've done a better job, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And I know for Cami, to be honest with you, and I know she said this publicly, so I'm not speaking out of turn, but um, you know, she had other opportunities years ago, and just she wanted to have a family. She wanted to be a mom, and so she stayed home to raise two boys, and they're growing up, and now she's kind of wanted to do her own thing. And I think some of those opportunities were there for her, a lot longer ago than maybe people realize. But she's a tremendous person, and I look at her, and I look at Jana Hefford on the Canadian side, and I think in the women's game, they're probably the two most respected people in the women's game by all the players and the people involved. And so it was no surprise to see her get that success in Seattle, and of course being so close to home where she is in Vancouver. And I know she's having fun, and she's going through that first year of adjusting and learning. And but what a tremendous get for Seattle. I mean, she's just a tremendous leader, tremendous person. And she's someone that we didn't like each other when we played, and now we have a lot of respect for each other. And I think that they got a really good find in Cami Granato in Seattle, so they're lucky to have her for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we're not going to keep you much longer. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us. But we do want to talk about women's hockey and the current state and the future of it. So, Zam, why don't you take it away?
Well, it was recently announced that the NWHL will be adding a team in Toronto for their upcoming season. This comes just after a year ago when the Canadian Women's Hockey League shut down. But we also see national level players like Megan Augusta working full time as a Vancouver police constable while training individually and in rec leagues for the national team. Where do you think women's professional hockey is currently in North America?
Well, Zam, first off, we don't have professional women's hockey, and I think that's the biggest misperception, if you will, is that we do not have a professional league. I was at one point a board member of our Canadian Women's Hockey League before I stepped down about 3 years before it folded, and we called it professional, but it wasn't professional. I mean, these players weren't paid; their expenses were much higher than. But we tried. We tried to make it. And I wish the NWHL all the best, and I think the passion is wonderful, but it's not a professional women's hockey league. And anyone who tells you any different, it's a perception of it. It's what they're trying to accomplish, and I get it. So that's where I think the miscommunication is that we don't have a professional women's hockey league. So the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, which about 150, 180 of the top female players around the world have joined last year when the Canadian Women's Hockey League folded. That's what they're fighting for. And so there's been a push behind the scenes to the NHL. And of course, the NHL is a little mysterious on some of their future plans, but that's for them to announce. But I think that group, and I know for myself in particular, that's something I've been fighting for from the moment I retired. I called Gary Bettman about a week and a half later and said, hey, let's go. And we weren't ready then, and I think we're ready now. And I believe we're closer than we've ever been before to having a WNHL. But I gotta correct you, Sam, in the sense that we don't have a professional women's hockey league. We never have. I mean, these players are barely paid anything. They don't have a dressing room to put their things in half the time. It's passion. It's great. It's a foundation of something. But we don't have a professional women's hockey league, and that's what the fight is right now going on. It's not a us versus them or this person versus this person. It's just about pushing to have a true professional women's hockey league where these players are paid, where they have proper infrastructure for physio, where they have a dressing room that they can just leave their equipment at overnight, where they have a home arena that's consistent, where they have refs that know the rules. All these little things is what they're fighting for. And that's one thing I'm so proud of this current generation, is that they're literally putting their careers on hold for this fight. And I think that tells you what they feel about the leagues that they've played in so far. And I wish them nothing but the best. I really do, but I'm fighting for a professional women's hockey league. That's what I'm fighting for.
So thanks for clarifying, because this is what's obviously been talked about, and one of the struggles of sports teams across Canada and the U.S. They're finding is fan support. I've covered university hockey across Canada, most recently in Montreal at McGill, and both the men's and women's team, both programs there, struggle to get 500 butts in seats for every game for their programs, and are at near national championship levels every year. And we're also seeing waning support for leagues like the CFL and other professional sports leagues across the country. What is needed to help find a professional footing for women's hockey?
Well, I think exposure. I think what happens is people see Team Canada every 4 years at the Olympic Games. So they see them at World Championships, but they don't know where to go watch them in between. And so I think exposure, and I know with Sportsnet, which of course is the network I work for, they covered women's hockey and they were a sponsor of the Canadian Women's Hockey League, but they played 5 games, and so it wasn't really something consistent where people could see. And but I have noticed that there's more and more fans. I know in Montreal in previous years it was like 5,000 people per game, and Toronto was always a tough sell. Calgary here where I live was always a tough sell. But I think it's about exposure. I think it's about a generation. You guys are young males that are covering sports, and so you cover not just men's sport, but you cover women's sport because that's the generation you are in. So we're moving to that next generation of media people who think covering women's sport and men's sport is the same. And so I think exposure is the big thing. And that's something that we've never really been able to get. We've never really found that TV deal that is every week. And I think that's really been missing. I really do.
And obviously a lot more is needed, but it was really cool to see a stroke of luck almost a couple of years ago in the NHL All-Star game that Kendall Coyne Schofield found herself in the fastest skater competition, and I'm sure that opened a lot of eyes in terms of exposure about what women can do and how they stack up to the men, and that's not what it's about, but that's a cool little story when we look back at it, when women's hockey is professional and there is a league, and how that might have played a part, but certainly still a long way to go. Is there anything else you wanted to leave our listeners with before we let you go? We've had quite a diverse conversation here, but and we thank you for your time and your expertise. Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with?
No, I'm good. I just want to thank you both, and thanks for having me on. And it's been fun, and continue to cover women's sport, watch women's sport, buy tickets to women's sports. And, that's a big thing for us.
All right. Perfect.
Thanks so much. It was a great conversation, and great to see your insight. And I'm, as someone has covered women's hockey over the last few years, I really want to see more support and see more butts and seats. And I find it so disheartening when I would go to like, say for example, McGill games, the Martlets were in the national championships last year, and for their final games, it was so disheartening to see not many people in the stands.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The NCAA has seemed to be able to grasp that. They've seemed to be able to fill their rinks, and a lot of those NCAA teams, their women's hockey games are jammed to the rafters, and they've kind of developed that spirit, if you will, that niche. And so we could probably learn a lot from them. But thanks, Sam, and thanks, Shahid. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Well, Sam, I find myself quite lucky and honored and privileged to have talked to Cassie Campbell-Pascall today, and on our Canada Day episode. It's something I'm going to remember for a while for sure. It was a pretty cool conversation.
Oh, it was a great chat with Cassie, and we were thanks to her and for taking the time to come on with us. And we are like essentially nobody to someone like that. And
how very Canadian of her, right?
Exactly. And for her to come on with us and have that chat, and she actually put me in my place during that conversation.
She did. Yeah, I mean, on a technicality,
Yeah.
and that's good. But she was definitely good to chat with, and like all our guests to this point, very open and honest, and really leaving everything out there, to use a hockey analogy or a sports analogy. So that was great, and hopefully we get to hear her on the air sometime soon. I don't think by the time this episode comes out we'll have hockey back to watch and listen to, but maybe around the corner, because it really is something that binds us and bonds us together as Canadians, and definitely something we could use right now for sure.
Oh, for sure. And last Friday we had the NHL draft lottery, which provided a lot of intrigue and confusion.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not happy about that. A lot of hockey fans, but who knows whether or not the Canucks can end up with the first overall pick, which is still possible this year if they fail to make it past the play-in round. But it's there's a lot going on around hockey. We still don't have a schedule yet, but who knows? Hopefully we get a chance to hear.
Call me when they're on the ice. Up until that point, I could care less, but that's because there's enough going on in my life where I just don't have the time to worry about if and when they're playing and when the schedule's coming out and who's got what percentage to draft. It's just like, let's get playing. And until then, I'm not as interested. And then maybe that speaks to my interest in hockey and sport these days, compared to when I was in, my heyday of fandom, watching Cassie Campbell-Pascall or Cassie Campbell at that point play on the ice. But yeah, anyways, call me when they're playing again. And then I'm back into it. Before we recorded this podcast, you told me we need to plug the social channels and website at the beginning. We didn't do that. So, but you can do it here, and I would urge our listeners to stay tuned in the coming weeks. We've got another hockey related interview coming up, but a bit different. This is a guy who made it to the NHL a different way. He's not on an NHL team, but he's working with NHL players as a skills coach. And this is a guy who had a dream of playing for an NHL team or on Team Canada, but ended up playing Team Canada field hockey and become
floorball as well.
And floorball, and then became a YouTube and Instagram and TikTok star with his crazy hockey skills. Pavel Barber is an upcoming guest. A good story for just kind of perseverance and sticking to it and getting to where you want to go through an unconventional path, but certainly interesting to hockey fans as well. So stay tuned for that. But Zam, social channels.
So you can find us on Twitter at Unanchored Pod, Instagram at Unanchored Podcast, and Facebook Unanchored Podcast. And don't forget our website, unanchoredpodcast.ca. So lots of our previous or all of our previous episodes are up there, as well as links to YouTube videos of these episodes and links to how to listen to them on your podcast platforms, and we're available wherever you find your podcasts. But yeah, we had a fun chat with Cassie Campbell today. We're looking forward to our chat with Pavel Barber coming up, and we have another interview beyond that coming up that I wasn't there for, but it sounded like
Sonny Dollywall. He's a Canadian comedian and a really funny guy, and myself and my brother-in-law Imran got to chat with him. He's also a comedian, overall funny guy. So you'll get to watch that, and our listeners will get to meet Imran at that time. And until then, happy Canada Day to everyone, and we'll talk to you again later.
Perfect. Looking forward to the next one and getting out and hitting the links over the next little while.
Yeah, if the rain stops. Okay, see ya.